From Washington, D.C. to the heart of America, welcome to Mark Alford's America. I'm freshman Congressman from Missouri, Mark Alford, and I believe in America. I believe in you. And most importantly, I believe that our greatest days as a nation are still ahead of us. You know, each week we take you behind the scenes to share the stories, the news, the legislation, to meet the great people who I have the honor of working with here at our nation's capital, helping shape our great nation. And one of those is lawmaker Troy Nehls. Sheriff Nehls. Troy's a sophomore member. He represents Texas's 22nd District. Most of you probably know him as one of the leading voices on the crisis at the southern border. Before coming to Congress, Troy served for nearly 30 years in law enforcement. He served our country 21 years in the U.S. Army Reserves. He deployed on combat tours to Iraq and Afghanistan, among other places. And after 21 years of service, he retired with the rank of major and as a recipient of 2 Bronze Star medals. Right now, Troy serves on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee and Judiciary Committee, and he also recently published a book, which we'll talk about in the second half of our program. Please welcome Troy Nehls. Troy, good to see you.
Mark, thank you. What an honor and a privilege for me to be with you.
You and I share a couple of things. Cigars. We love Ashton cigars. We'll might talk about that a little bit later. But you were sheriff of Fort Bend County, correct?
Yes. A county outside it for your listeners, it's southwest Houston. So Fort Bend County, we border with Harris County, which is really the greater Houston, the city of Houston and the greater area. So a great county, 850,000 people in that county. It's growing 25 to 30,000 each and every year, and that's where that's where I served my law enforcement career, a couple years in Wisconsin, and then the rest down there in the great state of Texas. And Fort Bend County has been good to me. I've been elected since 2004. I ran as a constable, became the sheriff for 8 years, and it's just law enforcement, a very rewarding career for me. My twin brother, my older brothers, was law enforcement. My father was a sheriff too. So,
really?
Yeah.
Well, my dad was a Special Texas Ranger. I may have told you that, and when I worked at KPRC Channel 2 in Houston as a reporter and anchor, part of my beat was I covered Fort Bend County.
Now, what years were that? Because Phil Archer just retired.
Yeah, Phil was a friend
like
of mine. Dominic Soxa.
Is that right?
Yes. So I was all contemporaries. I left there in 1998.
That's
so
interesting.
From 95 to 98, I was there.
Because Phil retired, I can call him, but during Hurricane Harvey and stuff, when the flooding a few years back, he and I were on an airboat just kind of surveying the damage, and we ended up saving this dog. This knucklehead had this dog tethered to his front porch. The only thing we could see was the head of the dog. Phil, cameraman, jumped in, saved the dog. I named the dog Archer after Phil Archer. Named the dog before I even really pulled him into the boat. And then we named him Archer, and then I looked at that, oh, this dog's a female, and I'm thinking, well, in today's environment, I guess it doesn't matter. So we're keeping the dog. The dog's name is Archer, and she's doing a fantastic job.
So you use the female pronoun for Archer. It's okay.
The dog's name is Archer after Phil, and it's probably, I have 4 dogs at home. That dog is probably the best dog I have.
Really?
That rescue dog, those dogs remember. They're
loyal.
I'm telling you, they're loyal. They're just wonderful. We have I have 3 daughters and a beautiful wife, beautiful bride, and they love the dogs, and that's it.
What made you want to get into law enforcement?
My father served in Korea. He's no longer with us. He served in Korea, 19 years old, the recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross. That's just below the Medal of Honor. I mean, he did some very heroic things, 1953 in Paul Gall province. Just amazing what he did. Then he returned from the war, and believe it or not, he was sitting there in one of the local establishments, and there was a county commissioner sitting next to him and said, Ed, what are you going to do now that you're back from the war and everything? And the guy said, Ed, would you like to get in law enforcement? My dad's name was Ed Nehls. And he said, absolutely. So he ended up going to work for the Dodge County Sheriff's Office in Wisconsin, and eventually became undersheriff and got elected sheriff. And then with my brothers and my one sister, 3 of the siblings chose law enforcement as their career. My older brother Todd became the sheriff in Dodge County, Wisconsin. I moved down to Texas. I become a sheriff in Texas. And it's just been kind of an interesting ride. Very rewarding career. But I tell you, I don't know if I could start all over again with the anti-police rhetoric.
What happened in the last 3 years that the respect for law enforcement just generally has plummeted?
Well, I believe it's the drumbeat from the left. You go back to George Floyd. I mean, that's what really started getting crazy in the
In
year
summer of
2000,
2020.
the 2020, but even kind of before that, with whether it's Zimmerman and some of these others shootings that were questionable, and it unfortunately all seems to be race-based too. You know, if you find a white officer that ends up shooting and killing or something of a black man, we have certain individuals on the left.
In our state, Ferguson. I mean, that's how Cory Bush is in office.
There you go. Yeah.
And hands up, don't shoot never happened.
Yeah.
And yet it was propagated in the American media that this happened, and it created instability in our society and distrust of the police.
Well, Michael Brown, I believe, Trayvon Martin, all these others. I mean, and it's sad. I think you get like individuals like Al Sharpton. I'm telling you, he's just sitting someplace waiting. His probably jet is on the tarmac with the engines running, waiting for the next law enforcement shooting that appears questionable, paints law enforcement in a bad light. He'll get there, and I just think people like that want to continue to divide this country, and I think it's very,
Why?
very shameful.
What do you think?
I don't know. I think they just they're not America first. I think many of them have they look at race as everything. They actually believe that there are police officers in this country, specifically white officers, that just wake up one day and say, I want to go out there and now legally, so to speak, shoot and kill or harm a black man. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world. Law enforcement, we were so offended in 2020 with what took place with George Floyd. I mean, that officer, you should have put the knee on the neck. He should have gone to prison. I agree with that. I haven't heard an officer say to me what he felt that officer did to George Floyd was good or right. I mean, so I think law enforcement polices their own as well.
But I've interviewed some African Americans in our market. One very good friend of mine who truly believes that they are targeted for traffic stops. Whether it's true or not, there's still that belief within some that that's happening. How do we change that? How do we, I don't know, how do we convince people of the truth?
Well, what you do is you don't convince people today, no matter what color you are, is go out there and fight the police because it's the right thing to do. I made some comments on some of the media stations and televisions. I said, you know what? My comment or warning to the criminal element out there, like it's, if you comply, you will not die.
Well,
comply.
My dad taught me, and he taught all of us 4 boys, if you get pulled over, and at night you especially do this, you roll all the windows down, you take your keys out, you put it on the dashboard, you get all your paperwork out, you put your hands on 10 and 2, and when the cop comes, I've gotten out of more tickets my kids have as well, showing respect for law enforcement.
Police officers want to go home at the end of the day to their family. They don't want confrontation on the side of the road or even on the sidewalk. They just want to go home safely, but they want people also to comply with what they're asking for. Are there some officers out there that are probably doing the wrong thing? Absolutely, but there's several of them, and I believe that we do a good job at policing those. But right now, with all the police rhetoric and the sentiment, I just don't know if I would encourage my girls or even my twin brother, his sons, to get into law enforcement. It's very,
That's
very
scary,
difficult.
though, Troy,
It
because
is.
we're going to have a generation not just that doesn't respect police officers, but can't find one when you need one.
Yeah. And that's when, you're absolutely right. And that's when they're complaining. But you look at the defund the police movement with the big cities that have called for the defund the police, specifically in Texas, Austin. I mean, the people are up in arms. Crime is up through the roof. People are being assaulted. Hell, you can't go to New York without getting pushed in front of a train. So I think there's all sorts of issues. And I think the American people are paying attention to this. And it's going to cost. The left has taken this too far. They've gone too left. And I think the American people are waking up.
Well, and the prosecutors also, the bail reform, George Soros funding these prosecutors to get into office, this type of social reengineering of this diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, but trying to right a ship that probably was tilting at one point. But we're more, I think, secure as an American in our equality than we have ever been. Did we have past mistakes? Yes. We still live with a stain of slavery in our nation. But we have come so far, and we are not a nation of victims. We are a nation of victors. We've got to encourage people to be greater Americans and inspire people to greatness.
Absolutely, and serving in public service for as long as I have, and now getting obviously joining the House of Representatives. I mean, it's an honor to serve the American people. But I'm telling you right now, I think our country is at a tipping point, whether it relates to law enforcement, with the crime we have, our southern border. I don't have to explain to you, Mark, all the different crises we have taking place in this country. I mean, I don't know, how long is this program? How long is the program?
Well, we're going to take a little break, Troy. We're talking with Troy Nehls, congressman from just south of Houston, a friend of mine. He's also written a book entitled The Big Fraud about January 6th. We're going to delve into that. We're going to talk about the insecurity at the border, how it's affecting everyone, no matter where you live in America. We are all border states. Stay with us for Mark Alford's America. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Mark Alford's America, where we give you a behind-the-scenes look at Washington, let you meet some of the great people helping shape our great nation. Troy Nehls is a congressman from Texas's 22nd district. How many districts do you have in Texas? Do you know?
We're up to 38.
That's insane. Your delegation is huge. We have 8 in Missouri.
Yeah, we're at 38.
Are you guys pretty tight?
Well, I think we are. A majority, we got 25 are Republicans. We gained 2 seats. I think you see that obviously there are a lot of people that are fleeing the blue states and moving in more to the red states, whether it's Florida and Texas. So we picked up 2 seats. I think we have a great state. I think the people in Texas are doing a great job. A lot of business, a lot of great people move into that state. But right now it's hotter than it's hot right now in Texas. Probably the month of July and August is probably when you want to just.
But it's a dry heat down in Houston. Right?
There's a lot of humidity too. I mean, if you want to try to play golf, and I love the great game of golf, you better start at about 8 in the morning because after 1 o'clock you're not going to enjoy it.
I miss the feel of Bermuda grass under my feet, though.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. That's kind of random. I want to talk about the border.
Yeah.
During my campaign, I was there as a reporter for Channel 2 in Houston many times. I went down during my campaign because really the fentanyl issue. 100,000 of our fellow citizens killed each year from this Chinese fentanyl. A large proportion of it comes up through this porous border that Biden really opened up before he even got into office. With a wink and a nod, welcomed 7 million illegal aliens into our nation. I know you're big on the border issue. What is the solution to the border?
The solution that I see is you just got to look back in a little history. And it was January 20th when I went to the inauguration of Joe Biden. And it was that day that he reversed all the policies. If you really want to secure our southern border, you got to put Donald Trump back in the White House in 2024. Because under Donald J. Trump, it was the most secure border we've had in 4 decades. The Remain in Mexico, which is the MPP, the Migrant Protection Protocol, Remain in Mexico. I mean, building that wall, and Mark, you've been to the border. I've been in front of that wall. It's a big, beautiful wall, and it has beautiful gates because it's not about legal immigration. This is all about illegal immigration. And the reason, and you say that Joe Biden, started inviting people. Joe Biden was inviting people into this country before he was even inaugurated. Yep. So there are millions of people that have come across this country. I think they're complicit. It's aiding and abetting. I think it's criminal.
What's their end game, though?
Well, the end game is all about votes. It's all about one-party rule. Eventually, the Democrats aren't stupid people. They're thinking long-term right now. They're thinking eventually like they have in the past. They think, let's get these people in here eventually. Eventually, we'll get some asylum in here. Eventually, these people will be American citizens. They're having children here, so they become automatic citizens or children. They're thinking 10, 20 years down the line, they're thinking, we're bringing Democrats. We are bringing Democrats, a majority of Democrats into this country.
You mentioned President Trump. He's facing a barrage of legal complications right now, if you want to say. You remember the story of Gulliver's Travels, and they would tie down Gulliver with this thread. That's what the justice system is doing. This weaponized justice system is tying him up with duct tape so he cannot move. You wrote a book about January 6th. In fact, you're on the cover of it.
Yes, sir.
Tell us about that day and some of the things in the book that the American people have not heard before.
Well, I would say it was my 3rd day in Congress, so I can remember, when the riot took place, I was at the back doors. I refused to leave the chamber. They wanted me to leave. The Capitol Police said, you must leave. And I just refused to leave because of my law enforcement background. Ended up having a little conversation with a guy, one of the rioters on the other side of the doors after they broke some of the glass. But I stayed there. I probably know a little bit more about January 6th than anybody because Leader McCarthy asked me to be on that select committee as a freshman, the only freshman, but Nancy Pelosi rejected us. First time in the history of Congress a speaker has ever rejected a minority leader's pick to be on a select
And
committee.
Jim Jordan as well.
Jim Jordan, myself, Kelly Armstrong, Rodney Davis. Yeah.
All
oh, yeah.
people who were wanting to get to the truth of what happened,
That's
and
right.
not this kangaroo court that they set up with a TV producer from ABC News to shove it down the throat of the American people, a lie of what happened on January 6th.
And that's why I wrote the book, really. It took me 14 months. Obviously, Donald Trump obviously has endorsed the book. It's a must-read for all Americans, and it's done very, very well. So the book is about truth. It's 10 chapters. We talk about January 6th in 2 of the chapters. I focus, many people out there are concerned about the shooting of Ashley Babbitt that day. I talk a lot about that, and I said Lieutenant Byrd, who was a Capitol Police officer that ended up shooting and killing Ashley Babbitt, I thought he was wrong. I mean, I know a little bit about probable use of force. I've done it for years, and what he did was wrong, never went to a grand jury. So I think there's a lot of cover-up. If you look at the leadership of the Capitol Police, specifically Pittman, Assistant Chief Pittman, who now Nancy found a nice job for in California. I think she's a chief at one of the big colleges, universities. But she hid the intelligence. She never shared it with anybody. January 6th should have never happened, is what I'm saying to you. And you could get that in the book if you go to Amazon. It's called The Big Fraud.
Is President Trump responsible for January 6th?
No, he's not. And I, you know what? They want to indict him on this.
Right.
I mean, you're going to try to indict him to keep him off the ballot. This and that. I'd love to have a debate with anybody about January 6th and have that conversation, but it's not Donald Trump's fault. I lay out the timeline as when the first breach took place, with Ray Epps, by the way, being at that breach point. Donald Trump was still speaking in the Ellipse. It's 22 blocks away. It'd take you a half hour to walk from it. How many people ever left one of Donald Trump's rallies while he's speaking? People didn't leave early. And that breach took place 20 minutes before Donald Trump even got done speaking. So the public didn't hear any of this from the January 6th sham committee. Benny Thompson was the puppet, and Nancy Pelosi the puppet master. So I think
did they not have security in place, knowing that people were coming to Washington, D.C. to support the President of the United States? Why did Nancy Pelosi not do her job and get the Capitol Police in place and ready for any potentiality?
Because there were 3 special assessments that were done by the leadership of the Capitol Police, specifically the intelligence section, IICD, December 15th, December 30th, and January 3rd. And when you look at that January 3rd report, 14-page report, on page 12, there's a paragraph in there that said the leadership of the Capitol Police knew that January 6th was going to get ugly. Supremacist groups from both sides, high propensity for violence. The Capitol building itself was the target, and they didn't share it with anybody. So when you look at these thousands of hours of video footage...
Well, they put your life at risk.
When you look at the thousands of hours of video footage in there, you look at a lot of Capitol Police officers, they're just in their plain old uniform. Big old Harry Dunn, Harry Dunn, he was one of the officers that testified. He
Because they weren't told.
He said, I didn't think January 6th was going to be like any other day. Because Uganda Pittman, did not share the intelligence. It's like she wanted it to happen.
That's a scary thought.
It is a scary thought. And then we take the majority. What does she do? She pops smoke. She gets a job in California. I need 5 minutes with her.
You think you'll ever get it?
I probably not. We need to expose her for who she is.
Well, is there going to be some other special commission or committee work done on January 6th? Because we got one side, because Nancy Pelosi prohibited you and others from being basically people who could ask questions in an intelligent manner to get the truth. So are we ever going to get the truth? I mean, I assume what you write in the book is you believe to be true. Are we ever going to get it before a committee to where we get the truth?
Well, I believe so. And if you look at this potential third indictment related to January 6th, I think we owe it to the President Trump to set the record straight, because the American people have heard this from one side. So I believe, and I have a great deal of respect for Jim Jordan. I serve on judiciary. I have a great deal of respect for Speaker McCarthy. So if they are truly going to go after the leader of our party, which is Donald J. Trump, who will be our Republican nominee, I think it's important that they give individuals like me an opportunity to get out in front of the American people and actually talk about truth. People really don't talk about these special event assessments that I'm very well aware of. I mean, I spent a lot of time on January 6th. I know a little bit about it. And I'm telling you right now, they want to sit and blame Donald Trump for this. It's not Donald Trump's fault. It's the leadership of the Capitol Police that allowed this to happen. And I've interviewed the General Walker. General Walker now
Former
was the
Sergeant
D.C.
at
National
Arms.
Guard.
Yeah.
He was the National Guard commander. for the D.C. National Guard on January 6th. I said, General, if you'd have read that January 3rd special event assessment, you would have read that, and we'd have had National Guard troops on our
He
nation's
was not
capital
given that?
on January 4th. Would January 6th have ever happened? He said it would have never happened. There were 200 and something troops 2 miles away from here, just National Guard soldiers just sitting around the armory. They were
And
sitting around the
General
armory.
Walker, the sergeant of arms for the Congress, was never given that information.
Nancy Pelosi promoted him to the sergeant at arms after January 6th. He was the D.C. National Guard commander. Great guy. I respect him. Smart guy. 2-star general. But I tell you right now, he said if I'd have saw, I told him, I said, when you look at that glaring report that talked about this violence coming in, National Guard should have been on our nation's capital on January 4th after that January 3rd assessment. January 6th would have never happened.
Real quick, 30 seconds. When's the last time you talked to President Trump?
Friday.
What's his mood like?
He's great. I told him, I said, you're the greatest leader in my lifetime. You're going to be the 47th president. He's going to do what Grover Cleveland did. Just read the book. Talk about Grover Cleveland. Folks, read the book. It's a great book. You'll enjoy it.
Thanks for joining us, Troy. Thank you for joining us for Mark Alfred's America. We'll talk again next week. Until that, remember that I believe in you, folks. I believe that our best days are ahead of us. And yes, I believe in America.